Bismillah wa salatu wassalamu ala rasulillahi amma ba'd. Unfortunately, my video's off right now because my connection's bad. As you can see, well, it's not bad anymore. Anyway, so 3 Saudi States Part 2. After 3 years, we come back. Last time, just a quick recap. It was a long session, but to try and summarize it quickly, we looked at the state of Saudi Arabia, or Najd, and the Arabian Peninsula generally, before the da'wah of Sheikh Muhammad ibn Abdul Wahhab, rahimahullah, how the people were upon shirk and bid'ah, and even politically there was no united leader. Every town had its own emir, and there were even some towns that had split themselves into 4 quarters, each quarter having its own emir. So there was complete chaos, and it was the region was unstable. And we also covered a bit of the Sheikh Muhammad ibn Abdul Wahhab's journey in traveling and seeking knowledge, when he went to Iraq and he went to Mecca, Medina, and he met the scholars there. And we mentioned the famous contract that initiated the first Saudi state, where he met, Sheikh Muhammad ibn Abdul Wahhab met Imam Muhammad ibn Saud, who was at the time the Emir of Dir'iyah, and they had that contract which then founded, bifadlillah, the first Saudi state, where the Sheikh would be in charge of the da'wah affairs, and the Imam Muhammad ibn Saud would be in charge of protecting that and defending that with his military and economic powers. So that state, it lasted for about 76 years, from 1744. We're going to go by the Miladi dates, the Gregorian calendar. It's easier to follow. Most of us are more familiar with that anyway. And it can help us put things into perspective when we compare it to European history, for example. So for 76 years until 1818, that it was called the Emirate of Dir'iyah, or the first Saudi state. It's 2 different names for it. And that continued to spread and increase and grow. And over here you can see on the map on the right, you can see the growth of that, where the light region in the small circle in the middle, that was the initial spread in just Dir'iyah and the surrounding towns, and then it spread to the slightly darker green area, north and south, or northwest and southeast, into UAE, Ahsa, and those regions, until towards the end it had expanded to include even larger borders in some areas than current day Saudi Arabia. So it included Qatar, it included Bahrain, it included UAE completely. And yeah, so it had expanded to that much. And this, obviously, we mentioned how it upset the Ottomans, that they saw this Tawheed being spread, and they also lost Mecca and Medina, and they lost the eastern province region, Al-Ahsa. So that upset them, and they sent an army, or they supported the army sent from the Egyptians under the leadership of Ibrahim Pasha in 1818, and they had superior weapons that the Saudi family Al Saud were not able to defend against, and so they defeated them. And we mentioned how they tortured them and they enslaved some of them, and they took the women and enslaved them and captured them. And we mentioned one of them was put on a cross in Istanbul, and another one was dragged through the streets. And Sheikh Suleiman, I believe, Sheikh Suleiman al-Sheikh, he was shot, I think, 100 times or 1,000 times, and there's that whole story there that we mentioned. So that was the end of the first Saudi state, and it lasted for 76 years until 1818. So now, just to set you up, because there's going to be a lot of names, so we need to remember the names. So it starts with Imam Muhammad ibn Saud at the very top of this family tree in black, and then he was succeeded by his son, the first Saudi state, Muhammad ibn Saud, and then you have the rest of those names that are highlighted in red for the first Saudi state. Then it moves on to the names in blue for the second Saudi state, which we'll come to inshallah. And most of the names that we're going to mention repeatedly are these 3: Abdullah ibn Faisal, Rahman ibn Faisal, and Saud ibn Faisal. So let's just remember those names. There's all three brothers, yeah, with the sons of Faisal ibn Turki ibn Abdullah ibn Muhammad ibn Saud. So after the Ottomans defeated the first Saudi state, things returned to how they had been before the Saudi states, and there was chaos and there was no organization, no unity for about 5 years until Turki ibn Abdullah, remember that name, Turki ibn Abdullah ibn Muhammad. He came back in 1823 and he returned the state to them, and they returned authority to them. And he moved the capital from Dir'iyah to Riyadh. Then he continued upon that state for, I think, 11 years approximately until he died, and his son Faisal ibn Turki took over from him, and he continued to build the state. I'm going to summarize this second Saudi state, this period, quite a lot. I'm skipping a lot of details here because I don't have that information, to be honest. So we're just going to skip over it quickly, but still, inshallah, mention as much as I can. Then, so he expanded the region again, and he never reached the full expansion of the first Saudi state, as you can see from the map on the right. Then in 1865, so about 31 years later, approximately, 32 years later, Faisal dies, and two of his sons, Abdullah and Saud, they disputed over the leadership. And so that started a series of civil wars, civil battles between them, and they couldn't decide over who should have the leadership. And that lasted for about 10 years until and during that time, the whole state started to decline because of the civil war. Then in 1875, Imam Saud, the second one, meaning the son of Faisal, he passed away. And the same year that he passed away, 1875, King Abdulaziz, rahimahullah, was born. Abdulaziz ibn Abdurrahman ibn Faisal, so Imam Saud's nephew. And when Imam Saud died, then his brother Abdurrahman ibn Faisal, the father of King Abdulaziz, rahimahullah, he was pledged. So the same year, 1875, he was pledged allegiance by the majority of the people in the area, in the Dawla. And then he stepped down 2 years later to Abdullah to avoid any conflict. But the sons of Saud, the one who had died 1875, the one who had died, right? And he's the one who disputed with Abdullah, his other brother, right? So the sons of Saud, they rejected having Abdullah as the leader. So 9 years later, in 1886, they came to Riyadh and they captured Abdullah and they imprisoned him in Riyadh. So now we're going to backtrack slightly and mention what was happening in Ha'il. So previously in 1834, so this is going back before 1886, right? 1834, when Abdurrahman ibn Faisal, Abdullah ibn Faisal, Saud ibn Faisal, all those three brothers, their father, Faisal, he was the leader, right? So he had appointed a person named Abdullah ibn Rashid as the Emir of Ha'il. On the map, you can see the position of Ha'il is north of Qasim, right? North of Buraida. Buraida is right next to Qasim. Well, it's in the Qasim area, which is again north of Riyadh. So Faisal had appointed a guy named Abdullah ibn Rashid as the leader of Ha'il, as Emir of Ha'il, under the rulership of the Saud state, the second Saudi state. So they were following under the second Saudi state, and they weren't a separate dawla. Then his son Muhammad ibn Abdullah ibn Rashid, when all these civil wars were happening, and when Abdullah ibn Faisal was captured by the sons of Saud, he saw an opportunity for him to expand his power. So he pretended that he was rescuing, or he came to rescue, so-called rescue of Abdullah from imprisonment. He came to Riyadh and he defeated the sons of Saud who were in charge, and he placed a guy named Salim as-Sabhan over as the Emir of Riyadh, and he took Imam Abdullah, he took him with him back to Ha'il, and he kept him with him for 2 years until 1889, where he returned him to Riyadh because he was sick. So he returned him, but he didn't get to do anything by the time he arrived, because when he arrived, he died from his sickness. Then Abdurrahman ibn Faisal, the one who had stepped down earlier to Abdullah, he now took leadership. And it's still 1889, but towards the end of the year, Eid al-Adha, end of the Hijri year, and he learns of a plan by the Salim al-Sabhan guy, who has been placed by the Emir of Ha'il as the Emir of Riyadh. He learns of a plot by Salim al-Sabhan to come and attack him or capture him. So when he learns of that plan, and the pretense is that he's going to come and give salams to him and so on, but when he learns of that plot, he then captures Salim al-Sabhan and his group of men. So then Abdurrahman ibn Faisal, which I've written on the slide as A.H. ibn Faisal to save space. He, at that time, when he's now taken back power of Riyadh, he writes to Qasim to get their pledge of allegiance, to make sure that Riyadh is now back in dominance, right? They're back in being the leaders. Al Saud family are now the leaders again. So Qasim writes back and they pledge their allegiance to Riyadh, even though before that, during the turmoil, they had been under Muhammad ibn Rashid, who we're just going to call Ibn Rashid, inshallah. When you read other history books, especially English sources, they just call him Ibn Rashid. So when Ibn Rashid learns of this, he learns of the capture of Salim al-Sabhan in 1890, he sends an army, or he comes with an army for a second time to Riyadh. And on his way there, as you can see, Qasim on the way, he's blocked by the people of Qasim, who are now under the allegiance of, pledged allegiance to Abdurrahman ibn Faisal. When they get to Qasim, Ibn Rashid, he tries to bribe Qasim, and he tells them that I will give you the zakah of these two tribes. I think they're Bedouin tribes, Mutayr and Khawwa. And he says that he'll give them their zakah, or their tribute from their passage, their money that they get for passage for people who are going to Hajj. And he'll give them a share of it, or he'll give them that as their payment in order to let him pass through and attack Riyadh. So Qasim, the people of Qasim, they accept that. And Ibn Rashid heads on to Riyadh and he besieges it for 40 days. Now it's 1865. Sorry, 1890, right? 1890. 1875 was when King Abdulaziz was born. So he's about 15 years old. So during this siege, Abdulaziz ibn Abdurrahman ibn Faisal and his uncle Muhammad ibn Faisal and two others from the seniors of the Al Saud family. And imagine King Abdulaziz at the time, he was age 15 and he's considered one of 4 seniors to be sent out as a party to negotiate. They were sent out to negotiate with Ibn Rashid, and they came to terms of peace where they came under the leadership of Ha'il, from what I've understood, and Abdurrahman would be appointed the leader of Riyadh and its surrounding territories, and they would also free Salim Sabhan and his men. So they agreed upon that, and Ibn Rashid returned back to Ha'il. Then Qasim, they want their part of the contract fulfilled. They want their tribute money to be paid to them. So they write to Qasim, and they write to Ibn Rashid. Qasim writes to Ibn Rashid, and they ask him to fulfill his promise. But Ibn Rashid hesitates, and he's not unsure, and then he eventually refuses. So Qasim declare war on him, and they attack him in a region called Al-Qar'a, which is that part that is highlighted in red. So you see where Dir'iyya is in the bottom right in red, and Qasim is the region on the map where it's circled kind of in the orange color, and then Qar'a is within that. It's a small town, and I believe that's also where Sheikh Abdul Qar'awi is from, so as a side point. In any case, he attacked him at Qar'a, and Ibn Rashid fled, or it appeared that he fled until he reached a place called Mulayda. Right, so you can see the blue arrow where the people of Qasim, they attacked him at Qar'a, and then he fled to Mulayda, and the people of Qasim gave chase. And in Mulayda, he turned his cavalry upon them, and he crushed them. He crushed the people of Qasim and defeated them. So that was all in the year 1890. So a lot of events took place in that year. So when this news reached Abdurrahman bin Faisal, he had already been preparing an army and he was on his way. He was halfway towards Qasim to support the people of Qasim against Ibn Rashid. So he had gone with his army and he was halfway there in a place called Khafs al-Arma, which is the region circled and it's halfway basically on the way to Qasim from Riyadh. So when he learned of that's when he learned of the defeat when he was in that area, and he learned of the defeat of the people of Qasim, and he knew that Ibn Rashid was now going to head to him and attack Riyadh. So he prepared his family and he packed his bags and he left and he headed east towards Al-Ahsa, where he stayed with his tent and his family in a place called Yabrin, between two tribes, one called Al-Murra and the other one called Al-Ajman. Yeah. So while he was there, because it's near Al-Ahsa, and as you can see from the map on the right, Al-Ahsa was under the influence of the Ottomans. So while he was there, the Ottomans tried to take advantage of him, and they wanted to negotiate with him. So they sent an envoy to negotiate terms with him. That's the end of part 2. Inshallah, whenever part 3 comes, we'll go over there. سبحانك اللهم وبحمدك أشهد أن لا إله إلا أنت أستغفرك وأتوب إليك. جزاكم الله خيرا.